Well, hello there. I'm Sin. We are in the Book Nook, and today we are going to talk about my top 10 horror reads of the year. A lot of them are from this past year, but some of them are just new to me. So there's a handful that are not going to be from 2024, but a good chunk of them are. We're going to go from 10, okay, so none of these are least. These are all books I thought that were awesome. Obviously, you always like some more than others, but all the books on this list are absolutely fantastic. And so we're going to start at 10 and work our way up to number 1. So the first book on the list of my top 10 is Oracle by Thomas Olde Huvelt. And I'm a big fan of water-based horror. So anytime you have themes of, whether it's straight up underwater or has the element of water or old gods of the sea or something weird like that, I'm in. And I'm a big fan of this author. I really liked Hex, and so reading this book too, it has a tie into Hex, which I thought was super cool. All right, so let me tell you what it's about. Basically, what happens is one foggy winter morning, these two kids, they're on their way, I think, to school, and it's Luca and Emma, and they discover this wreck of this 18th century old ship, and it's stranded in a tulip field. And it's like something straight out of Pirates of the Caribbean. All right. So they get up on there and Luke is having some super bad vibes. They hear this bell ringing and Emma decides she's going to go in this ship and explore. So she goes in there. Oh, I think that's when the bell goes off. And she starts walking deeper in and Luke is like, "Hey," because she goes in there, her eyes glaze over, and then she doesn't seem to be able to hear Luca anymore. And he's like, "Hey, come back. Don't, what the heck? Maybe you shouldn't go in there." And she just keeps going. And then she it's like, "Luca, is that you?" And then all of a sudden, no trace of her. She straight up disappears. And then eventually, the police come and government agencies come. And the people who keep going in there keep disappearing. And it's a crazy story. Man, that was a fun one. I would say I highly recommend it, but everything on this list I highly recommend. All right, so next up, that would be Horror Movie by Paul Tremblay. And this is the story of these friends who had met in college and they end up making a movie. So it takes place in the 90s. This group of people end up making a horror movie. So only 3 of the film scenes were ever released to the public, but those 3 scenes have somehow garnered this film a rabid fan base. However, over the years, all the people that were involved in this film have died in mysterious ways. And there is the one guy who was in the movie, and they called him the Thin Kid. And he went around and did all the conventions and stuff and kind of drummed up press and more excitement, I guess, for the film and whatnot. And they finally decide to make this movie. And the director wants to do it right. And so you get into the whole story of the movie and you see what happened and it's really effed up. So yeah, the Thin Kid is the only guy, the only surviving cast member. He remembers his secrets and all the stuff and things. And it's a very twisted story that I absolutely loved. And I can only imagine if they actually make a movie out of it because it'd probably be pretty awesome. All right, the next book is The Haunting of Blackwood by Gwendolyn Kist. The Blackwood vicinity was the topic of occult theories, tabloid documentaries, some pseudoscientific investigations, and it's about this whole block of homes that disappeared, and it's behind this weird impenetrable veil that only the 3 survivors who ever escaped could enter. And only one has in the past 20 years until now. Talitha Velkwood has avoided anything to do with the tragedy that took her mother and 8-year-old sister, drifting from one job to another, never settling anywhere or with anyone, feeling as trapped as her past as if she was still there in the small town she so desperately wanted to escape from. When a new researcher tracks her down and offers to pay her to come back to the vicinity, Talitha claims she's just doing it for the money. Of all the crackpot theories over the years, no one has discovered what happened the night Talitha, her estranged former best friend Brett, and Grace escaped their homes 20 years ago. Will she finally get the answers she's been looking for all these years? Or is it just another dead end? And the story was absolutely fantastic. It's so freaking weird and liminal, and I love haunted house stories that are like, it's not a haunted house, it's a haunted area of a neighborhood street. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I like hauntings that are outside the box. And this is definitely outside the box. And it's absolutely fantastic. And I loved it. Read this if you haven't, if you like good hauntings that are like unique and very well written. Okay, so the next one is The Reformatory by Tananarive Due, and this book will break your heart forwards and backwards and then again. It is so flippin' good. So this takes place in Gracetown, Florida in June of 1950, and you have the 12-year-old Robbie Stevens. He is sentenced to 6 months at the Gracetown School for Boys, a reformatory, because he kicked the son of the largest landowner in town in defense of his older sister's honor because that kid said some BS and he deserved to be kicked. However, and the kid was like not gonna do anything, but the dad is a racist MF, and so the dad was all like, up in arms and whatnot. So this 12-year-old boy is sentenced to have a stay at the reformatory. He also sees ghosts or haints that used to kind of be a comfort to him after the loss of his mother. It's also kind of a window to what happens at the reformatory because he sees the ghosts of the boys who had gone on and died before him and kind of like how they died and all that. And this is just an evil place where the people in charge, they beat and defile these kids, and it's effed up and it's heartbreaking and it's such an emotional story and it's so good. Okay, so after the reformatory is a book by an indie author, and that is Rogue by Luke Phillips. This is a Bigfoot horror, and so I read this during the cryptid readathon that we did. Holy bananas, it's so good. If you ever read Devolution, like it's on that level. It's freaking good. It's done in a realistic way that if the events of said Sasquatches in the story, like how it happened, this kind of seems like how it would go. Except for a part towards the end that's like the best. But I can't give any spoilers. So let me give you a little breakdown of the story. In the mountains and forests of Washington state, there is a secret. It has remained hidden for millennia. An apex predator that has mastered the art of the hunt. Intelligent, savage, destructive, and now gone rogue. It no longer sticks to the shadows. The hunt is on, and we are its prey. Nina Lee is a forest ranger, and she's assigned to numerous missing persons cases across Mount Rainier National Park and beyond. She knows that some come up here to disappear, and she knows most will never be found, but something has changed. Reports of a killer bear. It's not a bear. And the arrival of an undisclosed government agency have the community on edge. His brutal murders and home invasions implicate the work of a criminal gang. Her father suggests something else is behind the killings. Something from her past, from all their pasts, and it wants revenge. And dude, this book is so freaking good. If you like Bigfoot horror and cryptid horror, it's absolutely awesome. And also, if anyone's interested, I will have links to these books down below, as well as any of them that I did a standalone review for. I will have those video links down below too. The links to the books are affiliate links. All right, so the next book that we loved was This Wretched Valley by Jenny Kiefer. And I am also a fan of weird liminal stories in the forest. The forest is a strange and mystical place. So it follows the story of these characters. There's this girl, Dylan. She is a rock climber. Her geologist friend, Clay, he used to be a rock climber, but now he is doing his, I forget what it is, if it's like a thesis or some sort of thing for school. He's going to school to work in geology, but he wants to find all these places that people who are rock climbers have never been to so that he can map them out and all that stuff. So he finds this untouched cliff that's in Kentucky. is in the wilderness. And they found it because one of his friends, they were flying over and they were using LiDAR technology, which basically kind of takes the trees away and you can find like the rock formations and other stuff that's going on down there. And that's kind of how they found some of the new Mayan runes that they hadn't known exist before, that technology, if you don't know what LiDAR is. So Clay gets together his team. He has this research assistant, Sylvia. I believe she's a botanist. She's really good at identifying plants and plant life. So she kind of wants to go to get a sense of like what kind of plants are in the area and to study that. And then you have Dylan's boyfriend, Luke, and their dog as well. And Dylan's gonna document her stuff on Instagram. She's an influencer. So they all go to this place. And then 7 months later, 3 bodies are discovered in the trees just off the highway, all in various states of decay. One's just a skeleton, the second doesn't have any organs, they're gone, and the third is a mutilated corpse with the tongue, eyes, ears, and fingers removed. And Dylan is still missing. No trace of her, dead or alive, has been discovered. So were they murdered? Did they succumb to cannibalism? Or are there impossible bodies the work of an even more sinister force? What's weird is like the forest like shifts and moves. And it also seems to be the part of the forest where they go to, like stuff like winks in and out of existence. And it's like, that's why I say it's liminal. Like time doesn't flow right there. Like some of years past are bleeding into the future. And it's a crazy story, and I absolutely loved it. The author of this book, too, she owns the bookstore Butcher Cabin Books, which one day I would love to go there and check it out because it's a horror bookstore. Next up, we have my favorite short story collection of the year, and that was Never Whistle at Night, which is a collection of stories by Indigenous authors. It is dark fiction. Some of it is horror, and it's just such a wonderful collection of stories. Like, I loved every one of them. You know, you read some short stories and you're like, some are good, some are okay, and some are kind of like, they weren't for you. These ones, all awesome. Absolutely loved it. It's got a beautiful cover, and the stories are dark and disturbing in the most delectable of ways. So I'll give you a short little blurb about it. Many indigenous people believe that one should never whistle at night. This belief takes many forms. For instance, Native Hawaiians believe it summons the Hukaipo. I don't know if I'm saying that right, I'm sorry. The spirits of the ancient warriors. And Native Mexicans say it calls La Chuza, a witch that can transform into an owl. But what if all these legends hold in common is the certainty that whistling at night can cause evil spirits to appear and even follow you home? So that's like a lot of the themes that are kind of throughout this book. The intro is written by Stephen Graham Jones. So I had heard of some of the authors, just a handful, and it was Nick Medina, Tommy Orange, and Wabgashing Rice. And then now I've discovered a whole plethora of other awesome authors that I definitely want to dig into and see other stuff that they've written. But yeah, would highly recommend. It is awesome. Okay, so now we're getting into the top 3. Number 3 is We Used to Live Here by Marcus Kluwer. Kluwer? Still not sure how to say that last name. This is another weird liminal haunted house story where I'm still not sure if there are weird actual portals through time or if the stuff that happened was all in the protagonist's mind. I don't think it was. I think there was weird portals and stuff was very strange. So what happens is there's this couple, they flip houses, they move into the house, and however long it takes them, 6 months, a year sometimes, fix up the house, flip it, move on. So it's Charlie and Eve, and Charlie's at work, off-site, and Eve is at home, and she's doing stuff around, and all of a sudden there's like a knock on the door. And this family is there, and the guy's like, hey, we used to live here. I was wondering if I could show my family around, like where I used to live, show the kids, because, you know, they've never seen it and all that stuff. So Eve is kind of like, she has bad anxiety and she really wants to say no, but despite all that, she ends up letting him in. And they definitely overstay their welcome. It's creepy, it's deranged, it's weird, and it's one of those like, what the F is happening? It's got a little bit of that like House of Leaves vibe, and it's so off the wall and strange, and I absolutely love it. And I believe they're making this into a movie, so man, I definitely would be curious to see how they do it, because It's so freaking weird, but it's so good. Love it. I love weird books. All right, number two. And this one did not come out this year, but I finally read it this year. It's been sitting on my shelf for a year or so, maybe 2 years. And that is episode 13 by Craig DeLuey. And they're all weird. All these books are weird and I love them. So, episode 13 is about this crew from this TV show, Fade to Black, which is like a ghost hunting reality TV show. And it's this husband and wife team, Matt and Claire Kirkland. They are going to film an episode at what they consider every ghost hunter's holy grail, and that is the Paranormal Research Foundation. All right, so the Paranormal Research Foundation, there were all these scientists that were doing all these weird, like, psi experiments with people, like with clairvoyance and different stuff, and they all disappeared without a trace. And there was like a somewhat investigation, but they never really figured out what happened. And then I think like most of the files were lost to like a flood that happened. So like all that information is lost. And the only reason they're even allowed to go investigate is because they're selling this property and they're going to turn it into like a hotel. So they're probably going to they're going to tear it all down and whatnot. So they're going to be the only people to ever go and investigate this. It is a wild, paranormal, and liminal, another liminal. This year's theme is I love liminal books. Apparently, all the stories I really, really love are liminal. They're weird and they're strange and and extra dimensional. So there's some extra dimensional stuff going here. There's a labyrinth. They find this weird door down in the bottom of a well. And the door seems like it may have been created by entities. And this might be where this team of scientists disappeared. It's such a wild book. I loved it so much. I need to read more by this author. All right. And now, drum roll, I don't know. The number one book that I read is The Devil by Name by Keith Rawson. This is the second book in the Fever House duology. What a freaking crazy horror duology. It was so good. It's so deranged. The first book leads to like basically a apocalyptic event happening. Now in the second book, we're like 5 years later after everything that drove most of the population to madness. And so the world's still kind of overrun with what they call these fevered people. They're kind of zombie-like. They don't feel pain. So like if their arm gets cut off or their leg, they just keep going until they can't go anymore. And then they bite people and infect them. And then those people become fevered too. So there's still like swaths of these that roam the land, but a lot of them are contained. You have that going on. So they're also trying to reestablish the country, and there's like this massive corporation known as Teradyne, and they merged with the US government, and the partnership's very dubious, and they are quarantining major American cities behind these big walls and corralling like the afflicted there with the hope that they can develop a vaccine. But the vaccine development is not going so good. Now, in Portland, where it all began, John Bonner, every time I say John Bonner, I think John Connor. But anyways, John Bonner, he is looking for clues to humanity's redemption. And in New England, Catherine Moriarty mourns the devastating losses of her husband and son while hiding from Teradyne. And she was part of the family that kind of kicked off this whole thing because she was married to the man, Matthew Coffin, and he was responsible for these 3 revenants getting out, which were kind of like weird devil artifacts. There was a hand, a withered hand, an eye, and the voice, which was him talking and saying stuff that was basically like this weird song, devil, I don't know, The Message. They called it The Message, and that's what went out and made everyone go freaking crazy. I don't know if I'm describing this really well. It's a really crazy, chaotic series. It's awesome. Like, I was honestly like, how the F is Rawson going to even wrap this duology up? Because you kind of end on a super cliffhanger, you know? End of the world, apocalyptic crap happening. And I was like, how can he pull this together and have like a really good ending? And he nailed it. It's so freaking good. Also, this duology, if it entices you more, Stephen King and Joe Hill have been ranting and raving about these 2 books and how awesome they are. And honestly, they're so freaking good. So yeah, number 1 read, The Devil by Name. And obviously you should read Fever House first because you know, you need the you need the prior book. But for me, since I read that over a year ago, I couldn't quite include that. But yeah, this was my favorite book of the year. What's some of the best horror that you've read this year? Let me know down in the comments. And if you're a fan of videos where I talk about multiple books that I am reading or have read, the next video coming up will be about that. So stick around, check it out. And if you enjoyed hanging out today, hit that subscribe button, come back, see me again, and we'll talk about more bookish things and weird stuff.